Welcome to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. I'm your host, Fabian motherfucking Ojeda, and I don't know shit, but that's okay. All right, let's get this shit started. Thank you everybody for listening to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. Hope you all enjoyed episode number 78 with Potter and Sosa. They're always an interesting couple of guests there. And I know we're missing our fourth guy, Mr. Whitey. We voted him off the island. But hopefully he'll be back in the next episode. Just got to tune in and see. If not, I mean, we'll see if he'll ever come back. Maybe we'll replace him with somebody. But we're back, and we got a couple of new guests today. We got the guys from the Working Fans podcast. We have Joe and Dave here today. How you guys doing?
Good, man. Fabian, thanks for having us on, man. I'm interested to see who's getting voted off this island now, though.
For sure.
Yeah, we're doing well. We're just happy to be here, man.
Yeah, definitely.
Appreciate you.
Now, I was actually really interested to, talk with you guys because the Working Fans podcast, I mean, I haven't delved too deep into the subject, but I'm a pro wrestling fan. You know, I don't know if I'm considered a huge mark, but, I know the lingo, so I guess I am, and I think we've had a mutual guest that I talked to, Barry Horowitz, not too long ago.
Yeah, Barry's a good dude. Yeah. And it's funny you say the term mark. I think that gets branded negatively too easily. Like, I mean, to me, a mark is just like, are you a big fan of something? Are you rap? You know what I mean? Like, I'm a mark for a bunch of shit. I'm a mark for like pro wrestling. I get into like Marvel movies. It's whatever, whatever you're kind of a nerd for. I think sometimes it's fun,
Yeah.
Now, Fabian, I got to ask, what is your golden age of watching? Like, when was your fandom that really centered on?
I started watching, I remember being 3 years old, and most people don't have conscious memory at 3 years old, but I was watching, Ultimate Warrior on what was it, Wrestling Challenge or Superstars on Saturday or Sunday morning. And it was so vivid. I remember like at that moment thinking like, whoa, like he was probably beating up Barry Horowitz. I don't know. But, I remember thinking like, that's for me right there. Like, I don't care about superheroes. I don't care about anything. I'm like, pro wrestling, that's badass.
Dude, I remember, it's funny you say that because I have some memories. I'm a little older, but like 4 years old. And that's some of my earliest memories was like pro wrestling. I remember Superfly Jimmy Snuka like diving off the top rope. And I was like, oh, this guy's flying off the top rope. And I remember Andre the Giant being larger than life. And, that stuff's the stuff that like captivates you, like you remember that. Yeah.
So for me, I mean, I grew up, pro wrestling fan all throughout, elementary and middle school and high school. And then, I would still say though that my favorite era, because I used to watch all the old tapes, right? It's still that golden era with Hogan and Warrior.
Yeah.
All the colorful guys, even Brutus Beefcake in there, man. He, Mr. Perfect.
Oh yeah, the music.
Yeah, everybody had a gimmick. Everybody had an interesting little theme song coming out, and they had the managers and everything. I mean, I love the Attitude Era. That was a different style of entertainment. But I think my fondest, memories of wrestling are definitely like that 80s to 90s mix there.
Yeah, that classic Coliseum videotape era where it'd be like, you'd have the WrestleManias come out, then you'd have like wrestling's greatest bad guys, greatest managers. They'd have, right when rock and wrestling was coming together, they'd have the music videos that were starting to come out.
Yep.
Yeah. That's kind of what got us like, like we started off, we're pretty much a pro wrestling podcast, but we've branched out and done some other stuff too. But I mean, the wrestling things would kicked it off. Like, and you know how it is, like not wrestling, even though like you may love it and they get good numbers. And even now you look at it, like they're making a ton of money and stuff, like the mainstream anyway is at least, but it's like, it's a niche, right? So when you meet other people who know about pro wrestling on a deeper level, like, when I met Joe, I'm like, oh, okay. And I remember our other friend and guy who's part of the show too, AJ, who's not here today. I approached him at a restaurant. AJ and I were friends for 20-something years at that time already. And it's one of those things that I had just gone through a divorce, and I was thinking, man, I own my own little business delivering bread, but I'm like, I kind of want to do something else. I want to get involved in something else. And it's like, I've always loved pro wrestling. How can we get involved in that? And then I thought about a podcast, and I started listening to more podcasts because I own this bread job, delivering bread into my truck all day. I'm listening to podcasts. And I said, man, I'd like to do something like that. And I saw a few, ways to do it. And I was like, but AJ, you think we can do it? And he was excited about it. He said, we should get someone to edit the podcast and produce it. And I was like, okay. And we kind of sat on it for a bit. And then through another mutual friend, Scott, I started talking to Joe a little more, who I'd, kind of known. And we approached it, and Joe was all on board. And that's how we kind of got started anyway in the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of the same way I used to. The only podcasts I actually listened to were the wrestling podcasts, like Bruce Pritchard. When Ric Flair actually had one for like a cup of coffee. That was that was probably the first one. I'm like, holy shit, this is hilarious. And then all the other ones that sprung up after that, with Conrad Thompson and all the, was it Shivani and then
Shivani, Jim Ross, Eric Bischoff. Now he's got Kurt Angle, Jeff Jarrett. Like that dude just keeps on adding to the empire, and not small shows either. This guy is a heavy hitter. Yeah,
for sure. But yeah, it was just so entertaining because they're telling stories about people you watch all the time. And it's kind of weird how they become almost like, your one-way friends, like you've known them so long where it's like, every detail about what they've been through and stuff like that. It's kind of weird. I'm like, you're not that way with actors,
Mm-mm.
You might have a favorite actor, but you don't know like who they've married and, what kind of real life drama they had, unless you really follow them, through like a TMZ type of thing, but that's not typical, and it's kind of unique to the wrestling world.
And it's one thing about podcasting too, is sometimes you don't realize how much you give about your own life when you're talking. Because in your mind, you're just having a conversation with guests. That's why whenever anybody goes, hey man, I listen to the podcast, I'm like, oh shit, what did we say? Because it's like, what did you pick up that you learned about me that I didn't realize I said?
Yeah, recently I started a new position at work, and I think they're asking us about, what talents did you pick up during pandemic? And I happen to mention podcasts. I'm like, oh, why the hell did I do that? I'm like, because it's these little secret things sometimes, and it's like, and they're like, oh, you have a podcast? I'm like, for purposes of this job, I don't. So like, if if you want to speak to me off the clock, in a couple weeks, maybe if I trust you, I'll let you in, kind of thing,
Oh yeah, every week at work, everybody's like, what's the podcast about this week, Joe? And I'm like, fuck man, I just came into work, like I don't have my notes in front of me, like I'm glad you want to listen, but I'm not trying to promote it right now. It's funny how people hear podcasts and they're like, oh shit, you're special. It's like, nah, man, I just have a little more get up and go than you. Like, you could have a podcast if you wanted.
Yeah, they're like, oh, you're on Spotify. And I used to think it was a big deal too.
You're right.
Yeah. Because I was a musician, I'd be like, oh shit, I want to have a song on Spotify. That'll be a big deal. And then I saw how easy it was to get on as a podcaster. I'm like, maybe not that big a deal, but it is what it is. It's still a lot of fun. And I actually wanted to talk about your name there for the podcast, the Working Fans Podcast. Now I know what working means in terms of wrestling, right? But for the people listening who may not understand that title, what do you mean by Working Fans Podcast?
So it's kind of a double entendre in the sense that it is also
nailed the pronunciation on that.
Yeah,
word. You don't know how big that is.
Yeah, maybe you're gonna inside track here. That's I usually get beat up for that. I mispronounce things all the time. But yes, it is a double entendre. And so it does mean working, like we are working class people. We're working fans. We go to work like everybody else. But it also does mean it does have that little play on words where it's like in the wrestling world, working means, I'd almost call it like a hustle sometimes, right? Like they're working you, like they're trying to convince you what they're doing is real. They're conning you to get you to bite on an angle, a bite on a storyline. They're trying to work you. It almost has a negative connotation to
I know when
right?
you explained it like that, I'm like, oh man, we're trying to convince you what we do is real. Like,
yeah, right. Yeah, we're trying to work you and listen to our podcast.
We're not that depressed.
Hope you like it. But But I mean, it's really only more like a play on words. We kind of do mean it like we're that working class fan. Like we're fans of, in this case, pro wrestling, but other stuff too, like comedy and mixed martial arts. We're fans, but we're doing that necessarily 9 to 5, or even in some cases more than 9 to 5, and we're working, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, we all have full-time jobs. I mean, Dave owns his bread route, so that's beyond a full-time job. But we do this in addition to that. And I think originally we were thinking about calling it the Working Man's Podcast.
Yeah.
But it was a little too close to the Dusty Rhodes phrase. Mm-hmm. So we just went with Working Fans. And I mean, we've really just kind of lived it ever since we've done it. Like our dedication, a lot of times our days off are taken up with recording. We'll sneak interviews in after work, before work, whenever we can fit it in.
Mm-hmm. And I'll straight up take the heat or the praise, whatever, whether it's good or bad for this. I straight up wanted to rip off Dusty Rhodes. I wanted to call it the Common Man Podcast because I'm such a huge Dusty Rhodes mark, and I love all that old school stuff when I go back and watch it, especially even more now. But yeah, we ended up just kind of workshopping and brainstorming, and it ended up being the Working Fans Podcast.
Okay. Now, I mean, if all goes to hell, you could at least change Working Fans to OnlyFans Podcast, and then you might have a different kind of audience.
Dude, who knew that was going to blow up?
God, we've been so close to wrecking it and starting from new that we might have to keep that idea in our back pocket now.
Yeah, we had to get some better looking people than us. Not knocking us, but we want to make some money off that if we're doing that.
There you go. Now, y'all asked me, my favorite era of wrestling, but you guys on the show, do you all kind of have the same taste in wrestling, or does it vary and you guys kind of argue all over the place or anything like that?
So yeah, we're a little different. Me and Joe, we joke about that we've gotten similar interests now because we do so much stuff on the podcast and watch a lot of the same stuff now. But I'm older. I grew up on that golden 80s era of wrestling like you did, just a little bit before. Like I kind of remember the tail end of like the Bob Backlund stuff, but I really started getting into it like Hogan, and I always bring it up ad nauseum probably, but I love the Rowdy Piper cracking the coconut over Jimmy Snuka's head, and I was sold and immediately I wanted to see Piper get his ass kicked. But we have a thing. It's funny you talk about like going back and forth arguing. Like one of the main things we do is called the 5-3-1, and it's a top 5 list where we debate it down to 3 and then to 1, and we always pick like nostalgia subjects for the most part. We'll do current too, but we love debating like who is your best tag team, and that's what basically one of the big things about the show. We love to get that debate going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so Joe, what about you? What's your favorite era of wrestling there?
Favorite era? I gotta say it's the same as Dave. It's that 80s era, just like you said, the Coliseum video era, because it's so early in my fandom. Like I remember Hulk Hogan when I was young, and he stood out. One of my earliest wrestling memories too is Glow. I wasn't a fan, but I just remember seeing it and going, what the fuck is that? Like, it's like Hulk Hogan, but it's different. So yeah. I'd say it's a mix between 80s and what's going on right now, because currently there is such a rich crop of wrestling to watch that even if you don't like WWE or AEW, there's independents you can find in almost any state, mostly on YouTube, some on independent wrestling TV, that if you don't like what's on TV, you can easily find something else to watch that you can like.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned like Glow, because I remember one night staying up really late at night and they had like WoW, and I'm like, what the hell is this? It was the same thing, kind of like, very like campy style, characters, and it was all women. But I remember being a kid and just, when I found something new, I mean, I knew WCW was out there, but that's before, Nitro and everything. And it was kind of boring still. They didn't really have anybody that that captured my interest. So I'm like, okay, I know that's out there. I know WWF is out there. And then I would kind of just go crazy when something else popped up. I'm like, whoa, what do you mean ESPN had wrestling? Like, you'd catch like a classic ESPN clip or something like that. And I just always wanted to know more. It was and it was kind of crazy because, like, I know being a wrestling fan, you look around in class in elementary school, middle school, and there's not that many of us,
Right.
Like, maybe some people casually be like, oh yeah, I know who Hulk Hogan is, but nobody really watched like I watched, there's maybe one friend, and then that's why we were friends, because we were the only ones in the school who really watched pro wrestling like that. Did you guys experience the same thing growing up?
1,000%. That's how me and AJ became really good friends. Like, he started talking to me one day about, hey, do you know who Razor Ramon is? And I was like, you mean Diamond Stud? And he goes, no. I was like, oh, you mean Scott Hall? And he's like, whoa. And we're going back and forth because we knew the real name and we knew what other promotions he worked at. And this is nobody, not every, like, you can meet people that casually like it sometimes, but to find that audience that knows more than old school WWF, WWE, and they start knowing other promotions, that's when it gets wild. You're like, oh, okay, you're a big fan. And I guess that's one thing that's been kind of cool about the podcast too. It's funny, interviewing different people. Like you said, 4 o'clock wrestling, and I immediately thought back. We got Ross and Marshall Von Erich on a show one time, the sons of Kevin Von Erich, and it immediately brought back these feelings of like nostalgia, thinking about their dad and their uncles. And it was just so exciting to interview these two kids. They're like in their 20s, but because who they represented to me, it was just like, holy shit, this is a trip. I can't believe I'm interviewing the kids of the guys that used to entertain me when I was a kid, and I couldn't wait to get the hell out of school.
And then also Von Erich related later on, the guy that wrote the Lance Von Erich book reached out to us about promoting his book. And that was one of the first times that we ever had somebody kind of reach out to us and be like, hey, do you want to help promote this with me? And we're like, ooh, but we ain't shit, but yeah, we'll help you get it out there. And it's nice that people look to us like that.
Yeah.
Hey man, Joe is real as fuck. Like, he won't tell you we ain't shit. I always appreciate that about him.
I'm kind of the same way. I'm humble. If you read my little description of the show, is that I don't know shit, but that's okay. It's podcasting is fun. It should be fun, there's so many podcasts out there. The market is so oversaturated that if you get 100 people to listen, 200 people, whatever you get per week or per episode, that's cool, man. Like, I'm glad they're listening. I don't give a damn if there's 12 people listening, as long as it's fun to me, it's cool, but it's always a trip when people, want to use your podcast as a platform for something, but I wanted to go back to, it seems like pro wrestling, I became a fan as a kid. You all became fans as kids, right? But you hear this argument all the time that pro wrestling becomes like boring or unwatchable because, a lot of people use that against WWE right now, that, oh, it's for kids, and I don't like it because it's for kids. But it's like, you want to grow the product still, so you've got to kind of, get that kid, kid friendly content out there, right? So what are your all's thought on that? Where maybe as older men, you don't want to watch kid product. At the same time, it's a cyclical thing where they always kind of, try to cater to kids.
Thank God for DVR, man. There's stuff where I just fast forward to certain things, and especially with WWE program, I'm not even trying to be that guy. I hate being negative. It's just so much negativity on social media where somebody's got to be on this team or this team, especially if you go on like the wrestling stuff. But like for me, WWE in particular, I will say that like there's a lot of stuff because they're trying to reach so many demographics. And it's like, okay, that doesn't really work for me. I'll fast forward this and I'll play this. And then as a kid, man, I loved it all because they were probably catering to me, and even the adult stuff was cool. But when you really, really love it, like you love pro wrestling like we do, I won't lie, I won't say it never gets stale, but you just kind of roll with it, and then you wait for that really good shit to happen. That Steve Austin, Mike Tyson moment. You keep waiting for that. And for us lately, it's kind of been, and again, I'm not knocking WWE because they do some good stuff. I like the Roman Reigns character right now. I think he's great. But like, I love a lot of stuff that's been happening on AEW and, some other shows that I watched. It's like, it's been getting exciting again. It's like, oh, that's cool. This is new. This is different. Mm-hmm. And that's how kind of like I deal with that. Like if I'm not into it, I'll fast forward through it. And that's why we don't really do review shows either. You know, like we'll talk about stuff that we like. We will hit on some stuff we don't like sometimes, but we're not really into reviewing shows. And I don't know, Joe, do you have a different slant on any of that? Or?
I mean, as far as them catering to kids, I understand it because you got to get that next generation of fans. I think the WWE leans a little too heavy towards it. But yeah, I agree with what Dave said. I know I personally never wanted to review shows because we're not in the wrestling business and we don't want to take that holier than thou stance. Like, even though we're fans, we just try and concentrate on what we like watching. And once in a while, we'll have a criticism. But I think even when we criticize things, we try and find the positive in it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Now, you know, and it's funny how I'll just throw this in there kind of as a jab to people who say like, oh, but it's for little kids. It's for little kids. And you're a grown adult. You know, if you're a grown adult, you're still waiting for the video game to come out. You're still waiting for the toys to come out. You know, so it's like, you know, that's kid friendly too. So you can't bullshit me with that. Come on now. Can't have it both ways.
Okay, Joe.
I was going to say, as a grown-up wrestling fan, you can also get into some of the higher tier indies that are out there. You know, a lot of the federations that feed AEW, they get a lot of their guys from Beyond Wrestling in Massachusetts, from NEW in Connecticut, some out of like Limitless Wrestling in Maine, Empire State Wrestling in New York. You know, there's a lot of things out there. If you're an adult and you like wrestling, you can find something more geared to you. I think we all watch WWE like we go to McDonald's. We know it's not necessarily good for us, but it's got 50 years in the game. And how are you going to turn down those golden arches? Those fries are beautiful.
Yeah, I love them chicken nuggets once in a while too. But it's also too with WWF. I think I've heard someone else say this too. Like, you know, there's tissues and then there's Kleenex. Like they're just the brand. And it's what, you know, it's that go-to. It's habit forming. There are people that when they watch wrestling, that's what they just watch. I try not to do that now because I find that also is where it can get stale. So that's where I try to like, you know, I pick and choose what I like in a show, and then maybe I'll pick something from this show. And, you know, that's kind of the fun part of the podcast too, is like, sometimes we get turned on to different things. Like I haven't been watching it lately because we've been so busy, but we interviewed this guy, James Beards, who did a promotion in Texas called SWE Fury. I started watching his shows, and it was like a real old school Texas wrestling vibe. They were like fighting. They were doing like these storylines where a guy tried to put bleach in a guy's eye, and it was like, whoa, what is this? So I got into it for a little while, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's different styles. And I think, you know, for me, like I mentioned the whole kids thing because I remember, you know, going to Lucha Underground tapings, right?
Oh, God, that must have been amazing.
And it was really cool. You know, it was like the show was very, you know, how do I put it? Like, it was like a stunt show every time you went, you know? And it was a cool vibe because it was so, you know, small that you can hear everything just resonate through the warehouse and everything. You know, it looked real grimy and everything. And, you know, you had like the Lucha brothers there, and Pentagon, man, he was the star of the show, you know, but I just remember not liking the crowd so much, you know, like they took so much ownership of even their damn seats. Like they would, you know what I'm saying? They would sleep at overnight, right? They would camp out in front of the shitty warehouse in LA where you can go and get, you know, shot and, you know, robbed or whatever right there. There's right by the bridge, and they would sleep there and piss in bottles and shit behind a dumpster.
Jesus.
Right? Just to get their seat, you know, for the free Lucha Underground taping, right? And I thought, like, that's too much, man. Like, I like it, you know, but I'm not going to compete with, like, you know, 300 people to get a spot, you know? Like, I'll just watch it on TV at that point. But
yeah, we do a wrestling podcast, and we wouldn't do shit like that.
No.
And the thing that got me, though, was that at first, they didn't even allow any kids in there. Like, they said, like, you know, you have to be 18 and over to come in. And they didn't have any kids in the audience. And I'm like, man, like, that's like saying, like, you know, you can't take any kids to the circus, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, it's a different product and everything, but That's why I bring it up, because I'm like, man, you gotta let the kids experience the show too, you know. But I guess maybe they're going for that different vibe, and it was what it was. But it was a cool show. But moving on, I wanted to kind of, everybody's bringing up, the whole WWE and AEW thing, right? I'm kind of on the fence about AEW. I know a lot of people are embracing it and whatnot. I'm not as huge a fan, and I know you guys probably have heard this opinion before. I don't know if any of the guys on your show have this opinion, but to me, it's just like, a lot of the people that are on there are not ready to be on TV. They don't have a character. They look like your everyday average fan out of the crowd being thrown into the ring. I don't know. I'm not really into it too much. And then, other than that, they have like the recycling of all the old WWE guys, and they talk about, let's push this next era talent, but then you're just kind of sprinkling in the WWE talent in there. I really wanted to legitimately give it a chance, but I think just from what I've seen so far, I'm not as huge a fan. I'm not hoping they like die or anything like that, but if I miss a show, I don't really feel too bad about it.
Yeah, it's interesting because I do think they provide a niche, and I hear that criticism too, that they're bringing in WWE guys and stuff sometimes too, but I think it's still got to be the follow up, what you do with those guys afterwards. And it's funny, one of the guys, I don't know if you, an NWA Power, there's Nick Aldis, who used to wrestle in Impact and stuff.
Yeah.
And I heard him on a podcast not too long ago, and he made an interesting point too, that, there's a lot of people that wanted to have a guy on TV who they connected with. He looks like the everyman. But there's also a bigger part of the audience too, I think, that's a casual audience that we don't grab enough. They want to see people that are larger than life. Yeah. And that's why you tune in to a TV product, because you want to see people that are, I'm not going to borrow from WWE, but superstars essentially, like you want to see that. And so I think it's interesting. You got to have that blend, and maybe AEW leans a little too hard into that niche market of, where there's that fan base that just wants to connect with everybody. And from your point of view too, I would say you grew up on character wrestling when we're talking, you grew up on the Hogans and the gimmicks and stuff like that. Me, it's funny because I grew up on that too, but I also really got into at one point the Ric Flair versus Terry Funk feud, like in '89, this like very physical wrestling. And I think that's why I really enjoyed both. And for me, AEW is a nice alternative, but I like having both. Like last night, as we're recording this, like they put on some extra matches on YouTube with Daniel Bryan and Minoru Suzuki, who competes in New Japan. And if you follow New Japan, like he's a big star, and you're seeing that match. And then like CM Punk is on there, and he's having the first match on TV, and they're commercial free. Here's SmackDown. They're going an extra half hour, and they're commercial free. And they got Becky Lynch versus Sasha Banks, and Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns are going to be in the ring for and it's like, I love that shit. I love that, these shows are maybe starting to compete a little bit and bring out the best in each other. So I get the criticism of AEW, but for me personally, I'm enjoying what we're seeing as a result of having an organization. They're not really in danger of beating WWE or putting them out of business, but they're making some waves, at least a little bit in ratings. And I think that's good, because I think if you look at history, WWE was most successful when they got a little pushback from WCW, and there was that competitiveness. And I did not like Eric Bischoff when I was a kid. He used to give away the results of Monday Raw, and I was like, asshole, I'm trying to watch this later.
Yeah, I hear the same criticisms. I think sometimes, I don't know, they might get people onto TV a little bit early, but sometimes when you're making those new stars, you got to get them on. I follow the indies, so I'm seeing guys come up that I'm familiar with, and I'm like, oh shit, they're making it to TV. I think the toughest part for me is knowing that the guy that's really booking the action has just started booking when this TV show came about. And maybe that's the only thing that worries me, because I like, and maybe it's just now that I know more about wrestling, I like when wrestling has a good booker, like a smart wrestling mind. Like SWE Fury, we were talking about that stuff playing out in an old Texas way. MLW has some amazing booking with the way they've had Jacob Fatu as a champion up until recently. And to me, now it's storytelling. Like, how good can you tell those stories? Are you abandoning stories too quick and acting like we don't remember something that happened a month ago? You know, I think as wrestling fans, sometimes we just get complacent with, oh, they're not doing that anymore. Yeah, cool. I don't like that guy. You know, like things fall off and sometimes there's no explanation.
Yeah. What happened to the Cologne brothers in their travel business, right?
Yeah, all of a sudden they're like, nah, nobody likes Puerto Rico anymore. Just end it. And that's another thing, how the WWE treats non-white performers. It's like they can't nail a character down, white or otherwise. But it seems like if you're not white, you're almost not getting that good standing in WWE.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I never looked at it from that way, but I think on my end, you know, with some of the people that I can't relate to, like on AEW, it's because you kind of nailed it there because you watch them in other promotions, it seems, right? And to me, you know, even though I consider myself a more than average wrestling fan, you know, because I watch a lot of it, you know, and I've been watching for a long time. It's so saturated right now. I'm not going to seek out new stuff. And that's, you know, maybe when I was a kid in high school or middle school, I would have gone and tried to find everything on the internet. But like, man, there's so much stuff. There's Impact, you know, there's MLW. MLW is great, man. I've been a fan of that for a while. You know, there's all the you know, there's AAA and everything. And, you know, I guess I'm not familiar with certain guys, like, you know, for example, I'll give you like Darby Allin. I was like, when I saw him on TV, I'm like, come on, man, this guy's like 5'5", and you know, he's got the build of you know, like a teenage water boy, man.
MJF said you got that school shooter look. I'm really happy for you or something. Yeah, MJF said. Yeah, he's a hell of a heel, that guy. Like he pushes the envelope. He was in MLW.
He was in MLW, yeah.
Yeah, and they were doing Texas. They were in Texas, and he said, I'm going to try not to do the Von Erich thing. And he made this little joke about it. I'm like, man, this guy, he pushes it. But what I wanted to say, too, before I forget, doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but I just thought it was a funny moment. I was watching SmackDown last night. I don't even know if Joe knows this, but they finished up the Becky Lynch-Sasha Banks match. And this is a great thing, right? They're doing live TV, and now they're doing commercial free. So it's probably a little out of the ordinary. So Adam Pearce comes down, who's a legit official, and he's yelling at the guys like, get that table in there now, because they have to go to the next segment. They're like, get that chair in there now. And you hear Pat McAfee goes, there's a bald-headed doofus in the ring. You know, how about, hey, thanks for working hard. And then you can see Michael Cole kind of talks over him. And then later on, Pat McAfee, that's right, I forgot, we're commercial free. And it's like, oh, like he totally thought Adam Pearce was legit being an asshole. And he was like upset on live TV, but you had to kind of listen. I just happened to catch it at the right time. And I'm like, I really appreciate that those things kind of happen sometimes.
Pat McAfee, man, he's like giving me Bobby Heenan vibes, you know?
Yo, yeah. I think one thing I like about him, though, is he's just a legit fan. It comes across on TV. Like, he's excited, so he makes the show a little better to me because it's like he's generally happy to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so I wanted to switch gears a little bit real quick. I mean, we talked about, you know, like, you know, different promotions and how we like wrestling and everything. I want to focus a little more on the podcast now. What kind of content have you guys had? You mentioned, you know, the four of you talking about wrestling, but who are some of your guests that you've had on?
Oh yeah, we've had we had Al Snow on. That was probably our biggest name guest, I would think. We had Ricky Morton of the Rock and Roll Express. I said the Ross and Marshall, the Von Erich kids. We had Nikita Koloff. That was pretty cool. So we've had a lot of older guests.
Barry
like
Horowitz,
George South. Yeah, a lot of great into like the enhancement guys from back in the day too. You know, we'll talk to current independent guys. You know, that's the thing. It's like everybody's got their own story, and that's what's great. You know, like having them on. It's like, how did you become a wrestling fan? And then, you know, taking it from there and seeing like what their story is. Like we just had a kid on, maybe Joe. I'm blanking out on his name, but
Brandino Davis, who has like 8% functioning in his kidney.
Right. It sucks, but you know, like I think he's got a match, he was saying, and you know, he's gonna try to be on the comeback trail. And there was a girl
looking at a year out of the business.
Yeah. And it's interesting to meet, these different people and hear their stories. There's a kid who was a film writer, and he's trying to balance writing films and,
Sebastian Envy, Torion Films.
Yep. And it's just, meeting these people, these different backstories, and then, getting to meet guys like Al Snow you grew up watching. It's all.
Dave, don't forget, we've had Emmy Award winners on. We had Jason Agnew, who won a Canadian Emmy. We had Joe Galley, who does NWA announcing. And we found out he got a Emmy and he got a Shaqy as well. That's one of Shaq's awards.
Yeah, some kid yelled at him, and Joe responded with, he said, what did I say? He put it very nicely. He was like, F your mom in the P, F you in the P or something. And Joe's like, yeah, I did that with your mother. And that got him a Shaquille O'Neal award.
Oh, man, I'm going to try to get a Shaqy now.
Yeah, we've also we had Tim Storm on when he was the NWA champ, I believe. Nice. We had Ricky Morton on when he was an NWA tag champ. Trevor Murdoch before he won the NWA title. Mm-hmm. We had John Silver on our show when he was doing enhancement on AEW, like just shortly before he joined the Dark Order. We've had on other podcasts that we like. There's this Wrestle Roast podcast, and we've had comedian Mike Lawrence on. We've had comedian Dan St. Germain. We're working on getting Scott Chaplin from the show on, too.
And with comedy, too, it's funny. You meet different people. We met a guy who's on the spectrum with autism, but he's doing big things. He's putting out podcasts for people with autism. He's doing shows for the hearing impaired. The Patriot Del Wilkes, who passed away.
Snoopman Barnett was that gentleman.
Yes, he was. The Patriot Del Wilkes, who passed away. We had him on the show.
We got him before he died.
Yeah, we had to do that. But yeah, I mean, so it's interesting just to like get these different people, different background. And after the match, we just had our first trans guest too, who's going to be out, Carmen Beck, and hearing her story, how she got into pro wrestling. And, it's just getting these different people with these different stories and letting them tell it.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's like quite a list actually too, because I would think that, once you getting, and I know because I had Barry Horowitz on as well, and I had an option of getting more people on, but I'm like, I'm not a wrestling podcast, I like wrestling, but I'm not gonna focus only on wrestling. But I can imagine once you get one, you're like, okay, now I've got this person's contact, right? Is it kind of like that where you reached out to one and then you started? That's how you started getting the others.
I think it's when the first person said yes. We got like MLW referee Doug Markham, and we thought like, oh, we're the shit now. And then next we got Bob Cook that was in WCW. And then we were just amazed at the people that said yes. And as we talked to more podcasters, that's what we found out it kind of is. It's, can you get a hold of who you want on? Sometimes they say yes, and it's not a money thing, and you're amazed. You're like, holy shit, you'll just talk to me? Like, you don't want a payday? And then you just keep getting people, and it just goes from there.
Yeah, that's where you luck out there, man. That's, because they could ask for that payday and be like, oh, I could be at a convention making money right now, but I'm talking to you.
Yeah, we've only done it for a couple guests, and only really when the situation calls for it, really mainly legends, because it's like, you can't really tell a legend like, nah, your time ain't worth it. I mean, you pray to God they don't ask for the money, but if they do, it is what it is.
And just to put him over, I will say this: Al Snow didn't ask for a dime, just did the show, and he was a super, super great guest who's busy, and try to book him when I can again. But he's a guy that has his own wrestling school out in OVW, and they're running TV, and he's got his own promotion with them too. So it's like,
got a wealth of knowledge there too.
Oh, so smart. Yeah.
He's been everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, for as many guests as we got, there hasn't been a ton that have blown us off or that have just been like, I'm not going to say bad guests, but it was almost like, do you want to be here? Like, it felt like we were pulling the story out of them. And we've learned through that too, to kind of learn who might be good for the show and how to deal with a guest when the interview is just not going to be worth panning out.
Now, what what other aspects of the show? I mean, do you hope to maybe grow a little more? You talked about being MMA fans. Do you put a lot of MMA content out on the show?
That's new. We're only maybe 16. I don't know, Joe. How many episodes are we in right now? You know,
MMA. We are going to be releasing. Well, just today or yesterday, as of when people heard this, we released episode 17.
Yeah. So we're brand new into that. Right now, it's a lot of talk on what's going up with upcoming fight cards in the UFC and maybe like boxing once in a while. Like we just talked about the Fury Wilder fight.
Ooh,
and
real quick, I want to. God damn, that was a fight.
That was, dude. So all right, I grew up and I got away from boxing for a little bit, but I grew up on that Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, Tommy Hearns, those smaller class old school fighters, but you know, there were big names, and like Ali was just finishing up and Mike Tyson was about to come in and beat Larry Holmes. And I loved it. I loved Holyfield on that. But then I got away from boxing for a bit. It, you know, just wasn't getting the fights I wanted to see. And I would say, man, right around a few years ago when Fury and Wilder were going to hook up for the first time. And I started catching some of like, you know, these two personalities. And I'm like, shit, I kind of want to see this. And they had that awesome fight where Wilder basically knocks Fury out, but Fury came back from the dead, and it goes to a draw. Yeah, it goes to a draw. Then Fury puts it on him in fight 2, and it's like, holy shit. And this fight, I remember thinking, like, it'd be a great story if Wilder won, but I'm like, he's got the power, but Fury was so dominant. And then here we are, I want to say, in the middle of the fight, Fury goes down twice, and I'm like, oh, my God. But then Fury comes back, and it's back and forth, and man, how many times in life, especially, you know, it's not pro wrestling. You can't book the finish. So you have these two giant personalities and the final fight just pays off big like that. Yeah. Holy crap.
Incredible, man. I was, you know, it's the first time I was so entertained by a boxing match in a long time like that, you know, especially since you get crap like the Paul brothers out there dominating the pay-per-view scene for boxing, you know?
And not to knock him because he's very talented, but it's not the most exciting style like Floyd Mayweather. Like he's had some fights where you go and you're like, oh, this is going to be a big fight. And then it's like, it's not really that great. Like if you appreciate the art, and I can appreciate it, but it's like, you paid $100 and it's not very exciting sometimes. Like the fight he had with Pacquiao and, you know, you're hoping that more. But then, you know, and then, like I said, you get this fight and it's like, holy crap. Like that's why I want to see a big time boxing match once in a while.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like
speaking of the Paul brothers, I think the only things that Triller has going for it is that Versus series.
Oh, I've not watched that. Is that
that's where they put like two hip hop artists against each other and have them go hit for hit. It's almost like a minor concert. They'll do it along with the boxing events.
Oh,
but that's been the only part that's brought me in. Otherwise, like, I guess what the Pauls are doing is making combat sports. They're getting it into the conversation, but I just don't find that product interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I you know, everybody wants. I hate to throw around the whole like, oh, it's fixed, but so many people want to throw that out there with their fights. Where I mean, could be, you know, I mean, you look at the Paul brothers fighting and where they almost get knocked out, and you know, all of a sudden your opponent starts backing off. It's like.
Yeah. Yeah, the stuff with Floyd in particular, I think Floyd, where he fought Logan, it looked like Floyd was literally trying to pick him up. Like he hit him a little too hard. I saw someone tell me the highlight. I'm like, but Floyd's the kind of guy you could probably do that with because he's going to make some money and he's skilled enough to probably make an opponent look, you know, comparable. I don't buy, like you, I don't buy into the whole Paul brothers as legit combat athletes. They're not, you know, it could be fixed, but even if it's not, they're at very least they're putting some work in, but they're taking fights that they know that, oh, I could probably win this fight. Like he's got a name in MMA, but he's not really a boxer. His skill's wrestling. So let's make it so he can't wrestle and then we'll fight him. And he's only allowed to throw punches. And it's like, okay, so if you really look at it and see what's going on, but if you can draw that casual fan in there sometimes like that, and they're making money off it. So good on them, but I don't like it.
The Paul brothers also, you know, they were wrestlers. They were high school and college wrestlers, and so I'm assuming maybe they knew guys like Ben Askren and Tyron Woodley. Maybe they, you know, just kind of set something up.
Sure.
Ahead of time. I don't know, but even Tyron Woodley looked like he kind of had held back.
Yeah.
When he almost knocked dude out. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, not a fan though. Really. I don't know. They're natural heels. I'll say that. If WWE or something,
that'd be great pro wrestling. Yeah.
Yeah, somebody wants to use them, and I'm sure they'll get heel heat. Dan Lambert, by the way, MMA guy, head coach, he's been doing stuff at AEW. Old school wrestling fan though, like he used to pay and sponsor guys like Stan and Larry Hansen, so you could just go out to dinner with them and hear stories. He's going to AEW. I don't know if you got to see this, but he's like ripping on the crowds where, he's calling Tony Khan man, and making fun of the size of the wrestlers. And it's like, he's really good at like just, trolling that audience and pissing them off. And it's like, man, I could watch this guy talk for days.
Yeah. I mean, he was the same way in Impact. That's interesting.
Right. Yeah. But you can tell if you listen to him the way he talks, he is a big fan though.
Yeah, for sure. Now, what else have you guys, what's coming up on the podcast? What's some things that you're looking to throw out there that's going to be either new or exciting or, something that people can look forward to?
So, Joe, you got the new venture coming up, the horror podcast.
Well, coming up, I mean, we've got Leslie Nielsen movies on our comedy podcast this week. We did a 5-3-1 on that. Wrestling-wise this week, we're talking indie prospects. Our next live show next Saturday is going to be top 5 celebrity appearances in wrestling. As far as segments for the show that we want to do in the future, we're working on like a beer podcast where me and another guy try a beer. He's going to explain it in like a more intellectual way, and I'll put it in like a more basic way for people. That's something we've kind of been working on. We've been doing a horror podcast during October where I've been reviewing different streaming services. I did Shudder last week. When this comes out, my Hulu review will have dropped. And we're just trying to do different things to get listeners in. We started with wrestling. We branched out to comedy, then MMA. And we just always want to kind of keep it going because wrestling is such a niche that we kind of want to get into our other interest. Like we want to talk about Marvel movies eventually. I'd love to do a music podcast.
Now, this is all under the same banner under Working Fans Podcast?
All under Working Fans Podcast. So if you follow us on Facebook, if you go on our website, workingfanspodcast.com, our RSS feed streams right to both, so you'll get the newest episode. And they'll always be marked. If it's a bonus episode, it comes out as Working Fans Presents. MMA podcast, that's a Working Fans Combat Cast. Comedy is Working Fans Comedy Cast. So you'll be able to tell by the title what you're getting.
It seems like y'all are pretty busy then, because like a lot of topics there. Do you guys how much content do you guys crank out? Is it per week or per month?
Episode a week for each. We actually just set up a schedule so we could keep it straight and be able to promote it in advance, because over the summer, we've kind of just been flying by the seat of our pants, sometimes recording an episode that day, getting it out the next day. And we're just trying to invest in quality and promotion, because I think promotion's been the hardest thing for us to do. If I'm not speaking out of school, Dave, is
no, not at all.
We've been learning as we go.
I was looking at see how many episodes we put in. I think with the live shows we do, I don't have the number on. We're over 200 episodes right now, and we started doing this at the end of 2019.
We've currently got 115 regular episodes. We're up to 36 comedy episodes, 18 combat cast, and we've done 47 live shows as of today.
Yeah. So we keep busy. And no, not at school. I actually joked with somebody actually at Impact about that one time. We were talking about just ways to promote the show. We got connected with this guy, Ross Foreman. And he gave us some advice on promotion and stuff too. But one of the things I told him was like, we are overachievers at getting interviews, but underachievers in promotion. Like we're still figuring this out as we go, and not ashamed to admit that. It's like we're definitely it's learning on the job. I did want to say one other thing too, and all that too. One of the cool things we got to do is like in this networking thing is me and Joe ended up for a little while, and maybe again in the future started doing commentary for a wrestling promotion out of Florida. They heard us, needed a commentators, and they would send us tapes and we would commentate over it. Now we're not going to tell you we were fucking great. To quote Joe, we weren't shit, but we were good enough We weren't produced or anything, but it was still pretty cool as a kid who grew up on, Jim Ross and Gorilla Monsoon and all these guys to like be able to call like wrestling matches.
Yeah, that's true. Check out Knockout Wrestling and Florida Gulf Coast Wrestling. We actually did it for 2 separate promotions.
Nice. Yeah, that must have been pretty cool. Now, work. I think you mentioned it a couple times already, but I want to, get all your social media out there. Your Instagram, everything. Where can people find you?
Ooh, I got to take a deep breath before this because on Instagram we are working Fans Wrestling _pod. On Twitter we are @Fans Working. If you go on Facebook, we've got the Working Fans Podcast Facebook page. Our website is workingfanspodcast.com. Go to YouTube, search Working Fans Podcast. We'll pop up on there. We are a part of the Buzz Podcast Network. That if you go to www.what-the-buzz.com or search The Buzz on Facebook, that's where our live show comes out each week. But if you ain't watching it there, you can find it on our YouTube. I usually put it up a couple days later. I try and give them a couple days of exclusivity, but when you're as hot as us, you can't handle us without potholders.
We ain't shit, but we're hot.
There you go.
Yeah, we've got like a lot of confidence for somebody with no self-esteem, I guess is how you can describe it.
We'll surprise you.
That's wrestling fans for you, right?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
We shower, though.
There you go. Oh, no. You know what? I'm going to throw that in there before we end because wrestling fans are typically pretty stinky.
Yeah, smelly punch. If you go to some independent shows, you'll be like,
yeah, sometimes shit. It smells like they're cooking onions out in that crowd, but they're in a frying pan inside.
Well, I mean, onions and farts, I guess, because some of these dudes don't know hygiene, man. I saw so many bad examples of that at those Lucha Underground tapings where it's the same fucking guys every week, right? And I'm like, you wore that shit last week. Are you sure you didn't change? Because your fucking feet are caked with mud and I don't know. You smell like, fucking foot and ass.
My feet are strong, Fabian. My feet are strong.
Now, was that really in the Boyle Heights neighborhood, or did they just use that as a cover for the show?
No, it was. Yeah, it was right out there. Yeah, but I mean, it was like in a little shitty like industrial area, right? Where they do usually film a lot of TV there as well. Like I remember they filmed an episode of what was that? That show with
Law and Order SVU.
They might have done that one, but it was the one on I think it was like HBO or Showtime with Colin Farrell. And,
True Detective. Yeah, that's a True Detective neighborhood.
So where they have that big shootout, right?
Yeah.
Where like everybody's dead on the floor. I think that was where they filmed Lucha Underground. Yeah.
Yeah, that area looks definitely like where the railroad used to run, but they stopped coming years ago.
That's exactly what it is, yeah.
Oh, man.
But yeah, stinky fans and shootouts. But anything else you guys want to add before we close out?
Nah, man. I mean, thanks for listening to us. Yeah. Like, if you like what you heard, you want to support a podcast, we do sell T-shirts. Send us a message. We'll figure it all out with you. $20 for a T-shirt. We got it printed up. They're looking good.
That's right. Got to make some money.
That's the goal. All right, guys. Well, I appreciate having you on. Definitely was entertained by this one, man. I'm gonna check out your interviews. I want to definitely check out Al Snow for sure. But for everybody listening at home, I appreciate it. Thank you. Fuck you and good night.
Subscribe to the Ignorance is Strength podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, and share on Facebook and Instagram at Ignorance is Strength Podcast and on Twitter at The Ignorance Pod.